Welcome to The Rest Factor. I'm your host, Anna Marie Schick, certified health coach and resident sleep expert with Sleep Me.
Stop being a and have confidence in what you're doing.
On today's episode, we have Dave Tate, founder and CEO of Elite FTS, a company established in 1998 with the mission to educate and outfit the strength industry.
In lifting, there's a point in time where you start becoming who you want to be. You start becoming a different version of yourself. It might be a better version, a more aggressive version, or even a worse one, but it's different. You put yourself in a physical state where you're not scared of anything. Every problem, every adversity, it's gone. And the only thing that exists in that void is the fucking place.
Dave Tate has been a renowned strength training figure in the industry since the 1980s and has been around to share his information. Today we dive into the importance of rest and recovery, so stay tuned for more with Dave Tate. Welcome to the Rest Factor podcast. I'm Anna Marie, your host. I'm the certified health coach and sleep expert here at Sleep Me. On today's podcast, we have Dave Tate joining us. So welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thank you.
So you have emphasized the importance of recovery in training. How has your perspective on rest and sleep evolved throughout your career? And if you want to, you can go back further and kind of how did rest work for you in the beginning of your career, and then how does it play a role now when you work with people and talk about it and the importance of it with
interesting
people?
How that works is when I started, I was a teenager, right? So you can get away with a lot of things when you're a teenager. But I remember in the early years that the way that I kind of saw sleep is I had to earn it. So in other words, by the time I went to bed, I should be so tired, from all the training that I'm doing that it should just knock me out. And recovery, I don't want to say it didn't really become a thing. It probably didn't become a thing until, mid-20s maybe, because through most of my life, competitive powerlifting was my number one priority. So everything revolved around bigger numbers, bigger squats, bigger benches, bigger deadlifts, is everything from, where I worked, where I went to school, all of it. And that, under the first pillar of all that, was always training. What's the best training that I can do? Then under that pillar would fall nutrition. Am I getting enough calories? Am I getting enough protein? And you can get away with a lot of things when you're younger, and the nutrition I got onto pretty quick, right? Because it's moving up weight classes and having to gain weight. It kind of plays a role with that. But as far as actual recovery, it was probably around mid-college, to where outside of, I can't squat twice a week, or, I had to put more rest days in between the training, just because if I did more, the strength would go down. And oddly enough, even before, I'm trying to be as concise as I can be here, even before I looked at sleep, I was looking into recovery modalities. Like, I know I'm not recovering from, session A to session B. So I need to be doing, contrast therapy, hot, cold showers, or, sauna supersetted with, for lack of a better word, with cold showers, massage therapy.
I like the use
ART
of supersetting.
Yeah. It's any type of training modality I was putting in there. And that's not to say that these therapists, or whatever you want to call them, practitioners, weren't telling me you should probably look more into your sleep. It was always just kind of, and it could be the day and age too, because we're going back decades here. it wasn't really talked about because I think it was just assumed that everybody was getting to sleep. Meanwhile, I wasn't, you know, because of holding excess body weight, you know, not being able to sleep through the night, being, you know, over 300 pounds, needing a CPAP, but not wanting the CPAP because it would, you know, stigmas against the CPAPs at that time. And it took a while until towards the back end of my powerlifting career, then it started to kind of resonate that sleep is really kind of a part of recovery, and all these things that I'm trying to do actively, if it was active training sessions or all the different modalities. And I had these modalities down. I knew exactly when to put them in, how to periodize them, what ones to save before meet, which ones to not. I had this down. And it took a while for me to realize they're just hacks for the fact that I'm not sleeping more than 5 or 6 hours per night. And when you're running a business, and now we're dealing with the crossroads of both those things at the same time and having children, you know, it's like, well, who needs more than 5 hours of sleep? And I think if we go back long enough, Arnold Schwarzenegger was saying anybody that sleeps more than 4 hours is, you know, just wasting their time and a loser or whatever he was saying. And so then I got on to how do I get more than 6 hours of sleep? Because it would be 5 or 6 hours, but then what, every couple of weeks you sleep for 10, you know, and like now I'm rested, I suppose. How did we say that back then? That um I just fulfilled the deficit
Yeah.
with that one night. That's all
Yeah.
in there. And what it
Like a
came
piggy
down,
bank.
yeah. And what it came down to was just establishing a regular bedtime and hitting it. And that became a little more manageable too, because when you're starting a business, that's almost impossible. You know, if I'm training clients all day long, then I'm working on the business until 3 a.m, you know, so there's certain time periods to where even knowing what I know now, I still wouldn't have done it, you know,
Right.
just
I
because,
can imagine
yeah.
it must have been difficult for you to allow yourself or to give yourself permission to shut it off
Yes.
when all you're hearing is the noise about you got to grind or you're not going to be successful, and grinding means sacrificing your sleep no matter how long you have to
Yes.
work. You work and work and work, and that sleep is not a part of that formula.
No,
It
it's
is actually
not.
the opposite. It is for the weak. It is for the people that are lazy. It is for the So I think breaking through that, and as you said, even the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger, basically intimating that if you're sleeping, you're wasting valuable time when you could be growing. And it
Exactly.
turns out through all the research, because my background is in fitness as well, and um, you know, teaching all the classes, training all the clients, building muscle, it all happens. The building part happens when you sleep, it turns out.
Well, it's
And
funny, right? Because inherently I knew that. And all the people I trained with knew that because we knew we don't grow while we train. You grow when you
Mhm,
don't train. But
mhm,
that was being accepted as rest days, not the actual sleep. And today's world, it's different to where when I sit down and I'm having a podcast with, you know, world record power lifter or, you know, top athlete and so forth, it's prioritized, you know, it's put in there. And for the top lifters, sometimes it doesn't. It's still, I think it still follows the same path. It's one of
mhm.
the last things that they're going to look at. And I
Yeah,
think they end up looking at it too late.
right.
Whereas, for instance, in my case, you know, had I been able to figure this out and, you know, other variables as well, but the recovery aspect being the main thing, then I wouldn't have accumulated the injuries that I had. And it potentially could have gave me another 3 or 4 years on the
Mm.
back end of my career. And those 3 or 4 years on the back end of a strength athlete's career usually occur when they're at their best, right? So now, because normally what will happen if you're a full meathead is you're going to get to your best, then it's going to start to digress because of
Right. You
injuries.
just start breaking
You're
down.
going to start breaking down. And then after a few years, you come to this realization that I'm so screwed up, I can't do this anymore. Whereas had those breakdown years been growth years, then that strength athlete, or any athlete for that matter, would have been 5, 10, maybe 15% better than they were in their prime. And that's the thing that it's so hard to stress to them, especially if they're still in their 20s, because they can kind of get away with it because of the age that they're at. And that's really when they should develop those habits. And unfortunately, a lot don't because they can get away with it. But as we get older, obviously, it becomes more vital. But in my case, with those other variables playing into it, it was always a balance game. Like, well, if I, because of the business and things like that. So there came a crossroads where the competing had to go. And so it's a catch-22, because had I not been so injured that I would have had to retire, then the business probably wouldn't have grown when it grew because the priorities were not right.
Well, and so can you share specific strategies or routines that you've implemented to prioritize your sleep and recovery? And I like how you separate sleep from recovery, and that's why I keep separating it, because you obviously were dialed in with all of your recovery tools and modalities. I would love for you to speak a little bit about that, and then how you implemented it for yourself, and then now in turn for other young athletes and coaches.
Yes, I think it's important to separate the two, even though they do fall under the same umbrella. But the reason why I think it's important to separate the two is because the sleep will be ignored. It will be, everybody listening to this knows this, right? Because they all do
Yes.
that. And then when you
Yeah.
when you separate those two, because you still need the recovery between training sessions and all the other things, but when you get the sleep on track, then your recovery is better, your hormones are better, your cognitive ability is better, your metabolic rates, your immunity is better, you're going to get sick less often. There's so many factors that fall into all that, where if you look at, the number of supplements people will take, to build their immunity, right? Nothing against that. I get that, right? I'll take things too. But maybe you just need to sleep more, or you need to get better sleep. And the first strategy that I would put in there, that would start everybody with, is try to have a designated sleep time. Yes, there's going to be some fluctuation, but there's no reason why it can't be within a half hour or at most an hour. And just go to bed earlier. This is what just crazy to me. Instead of going to bed at 11 o'clock, go to bed at 10, or 9, and then God forbid you wake up early. So then you can get more stuff done,
Right.
before the day's in there. But that's the first thing right there is, and while, and this can be a little tricky because I've tracked my sleep with about everything, right? Watt band, Fitbit, Chilipad, all these different things. And I do think somebody should track their sleep. And where I pause a little bit is I've had sleep studies done. None of these tracking mechanisms are going to be perfect, right? There's going to be a certain degree of variation. But my argument back with that is if you're using the same thing all the time and it's consistently always going to be wrong, at least you have a baseline metric
Absolutely.
to be able
Yes,
to know.
you can gauge the trends.
Yes, because the first most important thing is going to be just the sleep across the board. But then deep sleep matters and REM sleep matters. The REM sleep matters, for cognitive function. I see a huge decrease if it's 30 minutes of REM. And I try not to look at it first thing in the morning because I don't want to screw my whole day. I'm sure you're the same way, right?
Predispose yourself.
You want to do that.
Let me see, how am I going to feel today?
Exactly. But there is a decrease in my cognitive function, the ability to be able to think, or if I'm training, the ability to actually focus on task at hand when I need to focus on task at hand. Now, the deep sleep helps me with the actual tissue recovery, right? And these are things that, yeah, you can read about and you can look it all up, but if you track this stuff for a long enough period of time, you're not going to have to look to see what's deep sleep, what's REM, and how does it impact me. You're going to know because you've experienced it over and over and over and over again. And so with those things, obviously there's the, darking the room out, the Chilipad as far as the temperature is a godsend, because I can set that up. I'm not as big as what I used to be, but I'm still 235, 240 pounds. When I was 275, 280, oh,
Yeah.
you're an inferno and you can't go to sleep because you're sweating and it's too hot. So
Nobody better than your community knows literally what the meat sweats are. Like,
oh yeah,
literally. I mean,
yes,
the amount of heat that muscle puts off. And when you are highly metabolic, the heat's got to go somewhere. And then you want to be comfortable and you've got the bedding. And so, yes, absolutely,
yes,
temperature plays a huge role in
yeah. And
comfort,
then,
how quickly you fall asleep, how long you sleep, how
well,
well
and
you
waking
sleep.
up as well. I mean, temperature increases, it helps to wake up, so but the chill part is it doesn't matter if it's winter time or summertime or whatever it is. If you're carrying a lot of muscle, it's hot, and if it's somebody that's using anabolics in any case, they're going to be hot all the time as well. So there's issues there, so those strategies there. And I would say a dark out room, but I use a sleep mask, so I don't know how much
The
the
same
dark out
effect.
room really matters. I can't see
Right.
anything. And I
Right.
like to use one that's it's kind of weighted. It's like a sandbag because I
Oh,
like the pressure,
nice.
on my eyes. And that's it. These are simple things. A cooling pad, a sleep mask, go to bed on time, and make sure it's about the same time. And it's crazy to me when I'll consult with, usually it's going to be top strength athletes. And these guys are pushing the boundaries. And when you start digging, and they want to know the secret, like what technique, what exercise, what PEDs, all these different things. And then when you really start digging down into it, they're not sleeping for crap. And then you ask why. It's video games, I mean, these are things they can control. Now, people that are working swing shifts and stuff like that, I get it. It's a little more complicated. But most of the time, it's that, or they can't rest their mind, and that can be meditation, that can be other things, just to be able to reading, which, people don't do that anymore. That's not a book, not a screen, just reading, to be able to settle the mind. But once they do all those things, then all of a sudden their gains start. They start making progress again. And it wasn't the routine, and it wasn't the exercises, and it wasn't the number of training sessions per week. It's huge. Circulation is another one. I mean, the number of strength athletes that just won't do a basic amount of just cardio for circulation, to be able to help the body recover blows my mind. They don't want to do the cardio because they're going to lose their gains. Like, you're out of your mind. The cardio is going to help your gains. You're just being
Right.
lazy.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to is, and it's so interesting to me because I kind of know what going all in means, at a very, very high level. And when I look back and I speak to a lot of these other athletes, they go all in, but they go all in on what they conveniently want to go all in on. When you start throwing out these other things like sleep, you know, circulation, better hydration, nutrition, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
They
I
want
question
the
if,
gadgets. They want the costly things.
yeah. And I wonder, are you really all in? You know, because you realize, and I think the more adversity people go through, just in life in general, the more adversity they go through, the more they realize that they really weren't mentally strong. They really weren't training that hard. They really weren't trying that hard. They really didn't care that much. They really weren't X, Y, and Z. And the frustrating part being older now is how do you get that through somebody that's past under 25? I don't know if it's possible. I'm still going to try, but I don't know if it's possible.
Well, and how do you respond to, I mean, in my opinion, I think a lot of it comes down to the coaches that are influencing these young minds, be it in middle school, high school, college. At what point do we get through to the coaches about prioritizing recovery as well as just training intensity? I mean, yes, we're pushing them and pushing them and pushing them and no pain, no gain and all of that. How do we overcome that mentality? How do we respond to those coaches so that it kind of, I've spoken to a couple of strength coaches where they were like, once I got that component, then all of a sudden, and I started focusing on it and educating my athletes, they got injured less. They were more powerful, stronger. Everything else kind of fell into place. Their mindset changed. Everything changed because they were prioritizing their sleep. But it's giving it, I think it gives it puts the responsibility on the adult, on the coach, the leader, the one who's forming their attitudes and their mindset to convince them, I think. I mean, how do you respond to that no pain, no gain mentality?
It depends upon the level of coach, because if we're talking a Division I or a professional strength coach, those athletes are going to have basically bedtimes, right? So the whole coaching crew is trying to build systems around everything for that performance of the individual, because it's an investment, in them, boosters, fans, all the other stuff. So I don't worry too much there, right? Where I would worry too much there is how are they handling I'd worry there where most people worry personally. That's where I'd worry about what is the workload, what are the stresses, how are you periodizing the program that you're doing, because that's going to have more of the influence, because those outside factors are kind of to a degree controlled more so than anybody else. When you're dealing with a personal trainer or something like that, now we're getting into a really dicey area, because they may only see that client a few times per week. And during that time period, there should be conversations on all that. But if you're dealing with Gen Pop, you're dealing with people that have kids, you're dealing with people who have their careers, their fitness is not even close to one of their top priorities, so you have to kind of do your best that's in there. The online coaches kind of fall in this same domain. But I think as we continue to progress forward, that I'm more of an optimist than a pessimist when it comes to AI and things like that. If you know how to use large language models, that's going to be the best online coach or the best personal trainer that you actually have. And you don't have to be a genius with this. You can upload your blood work. You can upload everything that you want. Ask it what question. It can design the perfect protocol for you. And even at the basic level, when you start putting that things in there, what comes back? Rest, sleep, nutrition. So the competition of a lot of that demographic is an AI large language model, which is already there. So what's going to become the most important quality for that demographic to stay relevant is going to be communication, and being able to master the basics of health, fitness, training, rest, nutrition, all those factors in person, because we all can read something. That doesn't mean we're going to do it. But if anything, and this is also making a big assumption that most people are going to actually end up using large language models, which, most of the people I know still don't know how to search Google right. So I'm not completely sold that that's going to actually happen. But if it provides the competition Then if I go back to my personal training days, the number of times I had to field questions that came from a news broadcast, a blip about training and fitness.
What was trending then?
Yeah, it drove me crazy, but it opened dialogue, right? So if this opens a bigger window of dialogue, and that window of dialogue isn't going to be a 2-minute news clip about some stupid thing that's not true, it's on a news show, but is a big chunk of what are the most important variables for my health, sleep comes up every single time. And then this is it's frustrating, right? It's got to be super frustrating for you because it's so basic. The answers are so basic, but the application may not be so, because now you're trying to change somebody's habits. And if they're used to watching Netflix until midnight or playing a video game until whatever it is, that may not be the easiest habit in the world to break. And that's where the communication part's going to come in.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible, barring, specific limitation, illness, diagnosed insomnia for whatever reason, for whatever condition. 9 times out of 10, it's behavioral. It's a learned behavior.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pattern, and it needs to be unlearned or corrected or rectified, course corrected. And it's free, it's information that's out there. They're actionable tips that we can follow that can really make our lives better, no matter what part of your life you're talking about. I mean, it's, it quality sleep controls your hormones, and that those hormones control your cravings, and those cravings control what you're eating, when you're fueling yourself, your mental state, your emotional, psychological state, your decision making, food choices, exercise choices,
It's crazy.
what you're taking in. It's just all of it, right? The light,
Yeah.
the signals you're sending your brain, when you're sending your brain the signals, and all of that we've brought on ourselves, right? So
One of the main selling points of pretty much everything in the fitness health industry is eliminating brain fog, right? It doesn't matter if we're talking about an electrolyte, protein powder, green drink, all of it, right? It's one of the top 5 sales taglines for all this. And for a reason, right? First reason is everybody suffers from, right? So it's in there. But the core cause, more likely, is sleep. And it's like I said, it's crazy because it's so basic.
So what advice would you give a young athlete listening to this? Or what would I don't know, 40-year-old Dave Tate tell
Well,
20-year-old Dave Tate?
well, 57, right? So,
I am being kind here.
yeah, I appreciate that.
We can dream.
Yeah.
I'm in your same level.
Yeah, it would be, there would be different phases, so when I was heavy in my competitive phase, it would be, don't be an idiot, get the CPAP, right? And this is one of the reasons that I didn't do this. Well, first off, a sleep study was more complicated back then to get than what it was. But the other thing was there was a certain fear that, if I'm 310 pounds and then I actually get a CPAP and I start recovering and resting even better, then am I going to be 350? And I had a 308 weight class, right? So there's that stupid, excuse that kind of falls in there. So the first thing would be, to be able to, during that time period, is, get the CPAP, and then everything else I was already being told by other people. Like, look at what these consequences may be in 20 years. And most of them had actually come true. And I was cool with all that, so I was good there. Then as I got older, the struggle was probably around 45. I'll get back to the younger people here in a minute, but around 45 was, and people get so irritated with this, is get your body weight down. going, and the mindset would be, well, if it's muscle, who cares? If I'm 260 pounds, I'm 15% muscle, it's all muscle. Cool, right? Whatever. When you're 20, 30, fine. When you're 50, no, it's body weight is a mortality marker, and I hated when people said this. I absolutely hate it. And I would have used the same excuse that people use now, as that. And when they get to that age where that starts to become that factor and they have to downsize or whatever you want to call it, don't make it too complicated. Just 10 pounds a year. You don't have to go on this strict bodybuilding diet and all this other stuff. It's really simple. Just get on the scale every day, and I think when I started, I was 288. And when I got on the scale, my rule was no matter what I do, I can't weigh over 290. And weight fluctuates when you're that heavy. So if I'm 285, it's like, cool, I can eat whatever I want. If I'm 289, I need to watch what I put in my mouth. And then 3 months later, the number's 280. 3 months later, it's 270. 3-4 years later, it's 235. So, and this is not a magical diet, just eating less and moving more, right? Okay, so those things, right? And sleep, yes, that's a factor. And the issue becomes when you get older is I don't need as much sleep now as what I did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would sit here and tell you I need 8 to 9 hours of sleep. Right now, it's like 7.5. Don't know why. You might know. I don't know. I don't know why, right? But that's what it is. But more importantly than that, though, is I know what my REM and my deep sleep needs to be percent-wise. It needs to be 20 or 30%. The REM, like 20, the deep sleep 30. And that's kind of where it falls for me. And if it's off, I haven't yet figured out the strategy, to fix it. I just try to go to bed earlier the next day. Sometimes I'll adjust the temperature, to keep it colder longer and see. But normally it will work itself out. Now, for the demographic that you're talking about, the younger people, and say we're talking those that are going to listen, 25 to 35. And neurologic, and it's not that they're not listening. I think it's still worth the time, to try to instill good habits. So at least they're hearing it. Because at some point in time, they will really hear it. But maybe, we need to hear things 300, 400 times before it actually resonates. So the earlier you start. But in that 25 to 35-year-old range, it would be more of the conversation of whatever they're working on at that time. If it is sport performance, business performance, or whatever it is, they're in their building years. Those are the biggest growth years, because if you have kids, they're super young, or that's a weird one. Kids probably not the best one, but because if they're super young, you're not going to be sleeping because you're around all the time. But there's certain phases in our adult lives where you can go harder and grow more in your business, relationships, and so forth. And when you're in those phases, the question they should be asking is, how can they, as I said earlier, how can I add more years on the peak of what this will be? Right. And that doesn't have to change when we get older either, because that would then be called longevity. Right.
Right.
The buzzword now. But if we're talking those peak years, and everybody has those certain growth years, and things will start to subside, businesses stabilize, however things are, relationships become more, what's the word I'm looking for, comfortable. You don't have to work as hard, because of all that. So you become complacent, right? So if you can lock in all these factors and extend that growth time period, then the net output of whatever you really care about, the relationship you're in, the business you're trying to build, the sport firm you're trying to build, is going to be, as I said earlier, 5, 10, 15% higher than it would be otherwise. As you get older, then it becomes more about how can I live healthier? I don't want to say longer because I'm not one of those guys that, you know, we're, I don't know if we can increase our life at this point, but you can increase the quality of your
Right.
life, right? And quality
Absolutely.
of life, going through a day in brain fog the whole time isn't exactly quality of life. If by the time 3 o'clock comes around, you're kind of done, but you can extend that to 5 o'clock, and that's 2 hours every single day, all year. That's quality time. That's quality life.
Yeah.
That adds up over. I don't think people disseminate this down into hours,
Right.
right? They're like, look, I want a higher quality life that's going to be, into my 80s. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how do we get a higher quality life tomorrow?
Right.
So instead of by 5 o'clock, you're shot, you're ready just to chill out, it's 6, 7, and that's 2 more hours every single day. You can control that.
Right. Right. I love how you just really break it down to, actionable, sensical information in general. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. And not just the recovery piece, but even, the strategies for growth in personal, physical, entrepreneurial life. So I really appreciate you breaking it down like that, and not just today on the podcast, but even on your podcast on Table Talk. How can people learn more about Dave Tate and Elite FTS and Table Talk?
It's pretty easy. You just Google me or put me in an AI, any large language model is going to come up. But I've had the company since 1998, and it's always been, while we're in the strength and conditioning sector, it's a media company. It was founded as a media company to be able to, pass on all the training information that was given to me that I didn't have to pay anything for. My wrestling coach, the powerlifting groups that I've trained with, the coaches that I mentored under, trained with, studied under, they never asked a dime. They just asked, effort. And as I graduated from college, and I'm going to date myself here a little bit, the internet wasn't really a thing, it was a dial-up modem, type of thing.
Mhm.
It started to bother me when in the earlier years, everything was becoming monetized. And it bothered me that me getting into all this when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, I wouldn't have had the money, to buy this ebook or to go to this mentor group or whatever was being pushed at that time. So somebody has to be able to pass on that information. So the aim of the company from then was live, learn, pass on, because live your life, keep learning, and then pass on from there. And in the early years, I ran into a little snafu, and it was called bandwidth. You had to pay for it. So then it became this balance of, I have to be able to sell something, but I don't want that something to be the coaching and the training and the ebook and all this, because that goes against what the aim of this is all about. And then I'm not doing what I set out to do. So we ended up in this e-commerce retail section to where we just sell the products that people are already using that they're interested in, and innovate,
Mhm.
make them better, and all the things that kind of
Mhm.
go along with that. But do that with the aim that would help support the content that we put out. And so throughout the years, when we used to have a Q&A section, you know, there were a million questions. We had a million pages of Q&As that we've had archived. There's probably 40,000 articles that we have on the site. And then, with each decade and every 5 years, the way content absorbs changes. So,
Right.
I was doing all this before social media. Then you got to figure out how to do it on social media. I was doing it before YouTube. Then YouTube came around. It's like, awesome. We can use the embedded code to put in our blogs. I don't have to pay for hosting. So I was using YouTube before YouTube was actually a thing. that people would try to use to be able to build ad revenue and so forth and exposure. I never really understood, like, why do I want to send people from my website to YouTube? That's stupid. I want them on my website, and podcasting and so forth. So it always evolves. So I'm very easy to find, because there is all that content that's out there, all the articles that's out there, the podcast, which is on YouTube and all platforms, the videos on YouTube and Spotify. The audio is across all podcast networks.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and wisdom. I would say more than anything, wisdom. It's so easy to find an influencer who can spew out a bunch of information that they've learned from, goodness knows where. But the fact that you're speaking from lived experience, from decades of knowledge, really, really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you today, Dave.
Great. Thank you.
Information, inspiration, and opinions are my own and are not intended to be medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider before making any changes to your diet, exercise routine, medical treatment, or if you think you may have a sleep disorder. Conversations I have with subject matter experts are intended to continue our efforts to optimize your sleep for better health, more energy, and improved physical and cognitive performance.